Welcome to Chapter 4 of the Hilder Chronicles. This chapter is called The Howling Cauldron. Vanaheim! Cried the lookout at the Drakar's bow, arms stretched out to the rocky shores ahead. Sage-green porpoises followed the weather-beaten ship, catching the morning sunlight every time they slipped out of the waves and slid back into the freezing cold. Don't expect a welcome committee. The king won't have forgotten how little he thinks of me, despite the years we've been away, said Asmund. His men grabbed their oars and rowed home with a sense of deliverance. Kyoko emerged from the tent, still finishing her long braids over her torn rainbow yukata. She wore a bear coat Asmund had given her and arched her back like an armadillo to mentally fend off the cold bite of the northern winds. What would this land of great ash trees and fierce men really be like, thought Kyoko. How could it be worse than the Jormungandr, than Takeshi, than my long-gone home? Asmund placed a comforting arm around her waist and popped into her mouth one of the last fried sardines in dried seaweed that Kyoko had prepared days before. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Frosty hills, daunting slate cliffs and tall pines welcomed the blade of gold into a narrow inlet, chosen to keep enemies fittingly at bay. Deserted wooden piers allowed the crew to easily berth, without wrecking absent royal vessels, probably away on another crusade. Thereby, Asmund could unload the light freight in peace without a crowd of helping purloiners to pocket the few treasures they had found during their adventures. Despite it being more practical, the fact that nobody had bothered to show up was not very heartwarming after such a long time away from the land of Odin. Asmund felt a lump in his throat, but then grew concerned. We could have raided this realm like an arrow through an eye socket. Where are the sentries? Asmund laid the palm of his hand over the hilt of his sword and gave his surroundings a suspicious stare. What is wrong? Asked Kyoko. Apart from the off-balancing motion sickness she was feeling, after such a long time at sea, the piers seemed to bob up and down. Asmund got the gist of her attempt to speak his language, but motioned her to be quiet. He noticed someone he had mistaken for a pile of seed bags crouched on the pier closer to the sandy beach. When Asmund called out to him, the man swiveled his head lethargically and tried to get up. When the middle-aged man finally got onto his 2 feet, Asmund was beside him, ready to strike if necessary. Sotor, is that you? Said Asmund, recognizing the blacksmith's son. Asmund, we thought you were dead. My head hurts, Asmund. I don't know what I'm doing here. Another lavish feast, I see. Or were you just trying to hide from your angry wife? I can't remember. The war is too long. You abandoned us. You seem to have forgotten a lot, my friend. I was on an expeditionary mission. A fruitful one, he gloated, winking at Kyoko. Is Vanaheim safe? Where is everyone? Sotor appeared lost in thought, mumbling gibberish to himself. All of a sudden, Kyoko cried out in shock, "Look!" A young man was floating face forwards in the sea. One of the crew members jumped aboard the drakkar and used a harpoon to drag the body towards the pier. When the man was lifted up onto the frosty red cedar planks and laid down on his back, everyone knew with certainty that he was long gone. The corpse's chest had been cracked open with an axe or by a large predator, and tiny asparagus green crabs were nibbling away at his innards. The cold sea water made the stench bearable. While Asmund knelt down to try to identify the victim. At the same moment, other bodies were spotted in the bay, 9 in total. Oddly enough, another body fished out of the sea presented the same cause of death. What had been going on here? Surtur trembled when he came back to his senses and saw the 2 villagers. "What have you done?" he lamented. Asmund gave the man a grim look, understanding that Surtur might be related to these men's demise. He also felt an unjustified wave of guilt and anguish overcome him when he heard the voice of someone he hadn't heard for so many moons. On the snowy beach stood his sister, followed by Ogni the king and a small crowd of guards and villagers. Hildur whispered something into her father's ear and pointed to the floating bodies. "Brother, where have you been for so many seasons and so little to show?" shouted Hildur from a distance. Guards behind her drew their weapons, and 5 soldiers marched towards the Blade of Gold, protecting their king and princess. "Hilda, it is good to see you. We have traveled further than any Norseman before us. Much glory awaits us beyond the known lands of men, I can assure you," replied Asmund proudly.
"From where I'm standing, you let us rot while you had your fun,"
added King Ogni.
"Not even a falcon to warn us of your arrival."
"My peregrine was eaten by a sea serpent, perhaps," suggested Hilda, observing the dead man beside her boots. Asmund and the crew members shared a collective moment of perplexity when surprisingly reminded of the hateful Jormungandr. Asmund replied, "Not a sea serpent, sister, no. We ate it for breakfast."
"So what evil curse have you brought home with you, boy?"
King Ogni said warily, nodding to Kyoko, who hid behind the tall ship captain. "Not an ill omen, father, a blessing. Where the sun rises on the other side of the Ice Kingdom, cities with unusual customs are waiting to be pillaged and conquered. Kyoko comes from an island of wonders where no Norseman has ever been. Nevertheless, my dear brother, the day you drop anchor on the sacred docks of your ancestors, 9 poor villagers succumb to mysterious deaths," said Hilda vindictively. "What plague have you dropped on our doorstep? Where did you really find that ravenous witch?" "Dear sister, you have sharp eyes to know that there are exactly 9 corpses floating in the bay. Kyoko has nothing to do with this. Besides, we found Surtur here when we arrived and he was deeply tormented." "Drunk stupid, you mean?" replied Hilda. "Why were there no coast guards to blow the horn when we sailed through the gully? Where are the archers?"
"Asmund, you deserted Valheim and fled in the face of danger. I worry now about our lack of coastal defenses. The war didn't cease because you decided to run away on a whim,"
said King Ogni. "I did not run, my lord. I was forced into exile." Sent away on a cowardly mission you were eager to embark on when we needed you the most, interjected Hilda. Whatever the case, you have cast a shroud of misfortune by bringing these sorcerers with you. Guards, seize that woman. My king, Kyoko is completely harmless. Ask Sotor what he was doing here.
You are in no position to be giving orders,
barked the king.
Take the witch to Nebelwood Dungeon and bring these scoundrels to the castle for questioning.
Burn the corpses, commanded Hilda.
A proper burial, perhaps, my daughter. These men deserve better.
They have been cursed. We can't take the risk of contaminating the entire kingdom. Our enemies would get a laugh out of that. King Ogni caved in, not feeling quite himself after another night he could not recall. The exhausted ship crew did not argue either or fight their way out of this predicament, and accepted Odin's judgment. They held their heads low while the king's men rummaged through the blade of gold shipload. Asmund clenched his fists, ready to slay anyone in his way to save his Blodugada. Hilda led the way through Vanaheim's center like a Pied Piper. Onlookers were advised to spit at the witch when she listlessly stumbled through town, and were encouraged to throw whatever bad eggs, rotten vegetables, or maggot-riddled rat carcasses they could get their hands on. At the very least, the memory of Otarunai wouldn't taste so bitter now, especially after wiping sheep feces, she hoped, out of her hair. The crowd was indeed enthusiastic, but was also in a peculiar mood. Most spectators were in a stupor. They looked drugged by fermented fungi or stinking nightshade. Their eyes had trouble focusing on anything. Their expressions were the same as Sotor's, lost and wary, battling in their own blurry minds to catch a glimpse of clarity. Nevertheless, the villagers were not a bad audience for Hilda, and joined in the fun of humiliating a stranger for no good reason. Hilda, however, did have her reasons. 9 of them were rolling around in a brown satchel she carried beneath her long black trench coat. A mahogany red stain was beginning to bloom at the bottom of her bag, but nobody paid attention to the thin trail of sporadic drops of blood in the snow, marking the path the mob were taking towards Nebelwood. At the back of the unruly pack, Asmund's outcries and attempt to break free were met with a powerful knee strike to the solar plexus. He was dragged away and locked up in the king's castle. The other men from the Blade of Gold awaited judgment in lesser quality lodgings they shared with sows. King Ogni did not partake in the degrading parade. Seeing his only son return home deeply affected him. He walked off into the opposite direction and gloomily strode into the castle's hall to sit by the fireplace. He would consider giving Asmund a second chance to help him be done with this never-ending war. To hell with the deadly hammer, to hell with the fiery belt. Toss the Mjolnir and the Meggingjord into the howling cauldron for me. Take my iron gloves for all I care. What good could they ever bring once all those I love have already crossed the River Gjord? King Ogni stared into the roaring flames and heavily drank from an aurochs horn frothing with ale. The horn was delicately ornamented with ravens and ferns, which didn't prevent the king from smashing it into the fireplace, scattering sparks of embers into the air like glimmering feathers of a firebird.
Odin, I implore your help.
He groaned. I am so weak and tired, so tired. An evil lurks among us, and I fear my son has nothing to do with it. Near a large opening into Nebel Wood, the excited crowd came to a halt. Eerie sounds emanated from the dark woods. Faint whispers of childish voices blended in with the rustling beech leaves. Foxes yelping, screeching of owls, ravens croaking, and weird moaning sounds in the dark sobered up the villagers in no time. The drugs they had surely been given wore off as quickly as they wandered off back home. Hilda remained with a handful of guards, promising them they would not be flayed alive if they followed her orders and locked the prisoner up in the Nebelwood dungeon. They did as she commanded. Hilda could hear tentative steps above her head, passing through the dense network of pale ash branches. Her imagination had a pretty clear idea what was following them, but erased the unpleasant thought to focus on what had happened earlier in the docks. Any tightly knitted tactic can fall apart if one unpredictable thread gets caught unexpectedly where it shouldn't be. Asmund had ruined everything, and now he and his slave had to take the blame instead of that idiot Surtur. "I'll take care of you later," she said out loud. Kyoko looked over her shoulder. Hilda's knitted eyebrows and fixed gaze suggested she was talking to herself. Hazy silhouettes abruptly passed through the princess, startling Kyoko enough to make a trip on an oak root. Down on her knees, Kyoko thought it must have been a misty breeze, but her eyes told a different story. A guard bellowed at her to get up. Her fingers were frozen in the frosty leaves. Why didn't anyone else see the lightly clothed woman staggering ahead of them? Or a ghost, a common sight in this part of the world? The woman's clothing was lighter than she thought as the mist around her vanished to unveil arrow wounds in her back. One arrow shaft had been snapped off between her ribs, while a lower one that had wedged itself in a hip bone still wobbled around with its crow feather fletching, dripping blood. The ghost's bloody footprints in the snow shocked none of the guards or Hilda, who kept on trudging along. Kyoko watched the frightened woman laboriously run forwards, desperately searching for someone, with hasty looks over her shoulders. More yelps and howling built up in the shadows, and the naked ghost disappeared over a dip in the forest path. The disturbing sound stopped when they all arrived at the bottom of the slope, in front of a hillock covered in moss, pines, and large stones. The ancient woman was gone. In a seal-grey rock face, a small gated doorway had been carved out. Through the door was a dark grotto, right under the hillock. Hilda removed from her satchel a large bog iron key. She wiped it against the walnut-brown leather bag and used it to open the old gate. A few snakes hissed and slithered to safety, while a blur of other furry creatures scampered through her legs into the forest. Ivy and moss had invaded the interior too. One of the guards cut the rope around Kyoko's wrists and pushed her to the floor inside. Hilda took an unlit torch from her belt and threw it into the cell. Kyoko stared back with woeful eyes, like an abandoned pup at the top of a sheer cliff face, resolved to die. "Use that if you can," said Hilda, and clanged the gate shut, scraping the key anti-clockwise in the rusty keyhole. See you soon. Kyoko shivered at the thought of what was at the back of her dark cell. A freezing wind disrupted the trees growing over the hillock. A snowy owl fluttered away. She was all alone, cold, miserable, and fed up with people. Is life torture? Does it get any worse? She curled up into a ball and wrapped Asmund's bear coat around her as tightly as she could. Insects crawled all over her, and a slowworm stroked her thighs, but she didn't care. She closed her eyes and hoped the bone-cracking cold would kill her in her sleep. Instead of heading into town, Hilda had somewhere to be. Voluspa was expecting her and had arranged to give her safe passage. The giant spiders she had suspected spinning their webs above her head coordinated their movements and spread the ash branches accordingly to let light columns squeeze through the canopy to guide her to the Huldra leader. Voluspa was not waiting for Hilda at the mouth of Bloody Hoof Caves, but a last column of light brought her exactly there. The canopy thickened, and the forest was almost as dark again as it was during the night. The caves glowed red, inviting her in. There weren't many other options. To flee would be madness. To stay put and be at the mercy of every vicious predator of the forest would be suicide. Taken by surprise, a young boy of about 6 grabbed her hand and led the way into the tunnels. Hilda gave out a cry of fright, but didn't resist. His skin was dark grey, and his stout body was swaddled in an unusual bile-coloured fabric from his ankles up to his neck. The arms remained bare, as did his feet, and long obsidian black hair hid most of his facial features, like thin reeds masking a midnight pond. "May I ask where you're taking me, young lad?" asked Hilda, with a sweet voice as if addressing a child from her village. The boy swiveled his eyes to one side, but avoided replying. "You do know who I am, don't you? Perhaps a little gift might unlock your lips." The boy emitted a low sound of someone expiring hot air to warm one's hands, although the caves were getting warmer as they walked together hand in hand down the sloped tunnel. He expired once more to let out his first words. "I know." "How delightful," replied Hilda, fiddling with her satchel's contents. "Then you know I am someone you need to protect." "Princess." "Yes, that I am. And to reward you on your mission to keep me safe, I have this special item I hope you'll grow to appreciate," she said, pulling out a golden apple from her bag. "I know it doesn't look like much," she continued, trying to ignore the scary shadows bouncing off the orange cave walls. "But I will have you know that this small object once belonged to a goddess." "You roll your eyes, I understand. I was the same the first time I was told about it." Hilda paused. There had been a curious sound floating in the air since they entered the caves. It was growing louder as they descended. Hilda even thought that the ground was a bit rubbery, stretching organically at every step. Hilda squeezed the boy's hand when a loud, muffled thud resounded around them. A distinct oozing could be heard in the expanding walls that looked like the bowels of a giant worm. After a darker passage in the cave, they arrived in a more stable area where sounds were almost deadened. But the oddities continued. The floor and the walls were fitted with gingerbread brown polished wood panels, and at every dozen or more steps there were bizarre snowdrop flowers hanging from them. Somehow, every drooping flower endlessly shed homogeneous light without burning the petals or clouding the halls with smoke. Between the paradoxical flower torches, incredible paintings in thick, ornamented frames hung on the walls. Some pictures were like herbal hallucinations with melting objects and impressive animals stretching their elastic legs. Another painting was a colourful view of a pink island with feathery trees and a dark shadow carrying something over his shoulder. The next was a black and white nightmare with sensual female bodies that were closer to reptile skeletons than humans. Hilda didn't understand the meaning of this outlandish art or why it was here, but she felt she had to get a closer look. A chestnut-haired girl in a pink dress caught her eye. She was sitting on a rock in the middle of a grove with pale flowers at her feet, and in her hands was a golden box that the girl was peeking into. The older boy tugged her hand and made no attempt to explain what Hilda was so fascinated about. "Please keep your eyes to the ground and hurry up," he requested. Hilda shook her head and continued her tale to keep her mind off the tunnel's absurdities. "Well, one day the fruit fell from one of Goddess Idun's trees into a river. That river froze and became a glacier. When the earth split open and rivers of fire flowed wild, the ice melted, and as soon as the frozen apple touched the molten rock, it turned to gold," Hilda said while keeping an eye out as they strolled down into the depths of the cave. Many tunnel openings and archways indicated different directions, and some doors ajar exposed puzzling rooms that withheld most strange lights, smells, and laughter. Hilda closed her eyes briefly and continued. "One of my ancestors stumbled across the apple while tilling the land. He was granted extended life. He lived for decades, outliving anyone he had grown up with or loved, but in the end he chose to donate this prestigious item to a complete stranger. That person perpetuated the tradition until one day the golden apple found its way back to my family. My own father broke the tradition and gave the apple to me on the day my mother died." Hilda contemplated the golden apple and saw reflections of iron-black firebirds pass her by. The sculpted metal birds in chromium alcoves held lights that hovered in their beaks and illuminated white walls in various colors. The fluctuating lights were definitely not fire, so what were they? The boy tugged her hand again so that she paid attention to the lead-black steps ahead. She resumed her monologue, not really caring about the metallic clang of the steps beneath her boots. "So, do you know why I want you to have it now?" The boy shrugged his shoulders, feigning his aloof manner. "Because it is good to remember that the world's most extravagant and rare treasures are worthless when hell looks you in the eyes, and there is nobody left to protect or love. Here, take good care of it, and when you understand what I meant, offer it to someone else." The boy's dark eyes lit up when he let go of Hilda's hand to hold the golden apple. He gave furtive looks left and right to check if anyone was watching, and hid the trinket in an inside pocket beneath his tunic of straps. "Wait," he said, pulling out a folded ash leaf from another concealed pocket. He held out the leaf pouch that contained something within. "Please, what is it?" "You call it candy. Sweets. The Drogar, the Huldra I mean, love to make hellsots. My gift to you, Hilda, daughter of King Ogni and late Queen Skegerd, heir to the throne, second in line, unofficially betrothed to Hedil, adopted son of King Najal and Queen Asgard. Aren't you the chattering sparrow when you want to be, with such enticing details to share? Tell me more about Prince Hedil," Hilda asked, not believing what she was hearing. "First, you must taste my gift. That hellsot is my mother's specialty. It's called a scully comb. Don't be afraid, no one means you any harm here." "Is that so?" said Hilda, unwrapping the sweet. Inside the ash leaf was a powdery white bonbon, oddly shaped as a human skull. For some reason, Hilda felt compelled to taste it, almost imagining she could sense an orange glow in its core. "I don't feel too comfortable eating a death head, you know." "You'll love it," said the boy, unwrapping one for himself, to gobble up the instant later. As soon as he plopped the skull into his mouth, he winced at first, then gradually the boy was beaming with joy. "You don't strike me as a lady who gives up easily. Try to enjoy the first few moments. The ending will only be the sweeter." Hilda could resist no more and placed the scullycomb on her tongue. The first thing that came to mind was the taste of licking apple vinegar off a pine forest path. Then a blooming symphony occurred in her mouth, a musical sunset, a mixture of love and death, an accumulation of every living being's existence crystallized in a single taste of honey. Quite the mouthful for such a small morsel. "Oh, hell!" expired Hilda euphorically. "Little boy, you haven't poisoned me, have you?" "Of course not. My mother is an exceptional cook." "You speak no lies," said Hilda, with a rare smile illuminating her face. "I nearly forgot to ask. Tell me more about Prince Hedil, and what name should I call you?" "Well, Prince Hedil is the son of Skeptical Princess Hilda doesn't have time for gossip in hellsots," said Voluspa solemnly, exiting a narrow archway to their left. The boy stuffed his clothes with his leaf wrapping and scampered off before Voluspa could scold him. "I'm sorry, Mother." "I know you are, Sune." "Gossip and hellsots do go down well together, I have to admit," said Hilda, whose brief lapse of joy had already wilted. "Careless talk leads to dead ends in these caves," said Voluspa. "That sounds like a threat, doesn't it? The young boy said my safety here was guaranteed. Was he lying?" "The child hasn't yet acquired that human quality, luckily. Your Grace, since you have descended further than ever before in these stylish caves, could I show you something else you might enjoy other than scully combs, cinder nuts, or stab apples? We have your best interest at heart, dear Hilda, I can assure you." "I'm honored, and you've piqued my curiosity," replied Hilda, who was in a suspiciously positive mood. "Good. Well, follow me, young raven." Hilda walked behind the short blonde sexagenarian who wore her hair in a long plait over her dress made of the same leathery fabric as the boy's tunic. Strips of dark, swaying leather hung from a silver belt, large enough to reach her ribs. The leather layers molded her curved body up to bare, light grey shoulders. Her arms were swaddled in leather too, all the way down to her fingertips. At the end of a short hallway at the bottom of the fleet of black stairs, a large wooden door wavered slightly. It wasn't perceptible straight away, but there was a translucent screen blocking the way on the last step. Voluspa stepped right through the screen and unlocked the arched door. Hilda hesitated a short moment, then hopped through haphazardly, expecting the worst, which was most out of character. Luckily, her hair and clothes were not singed and her mind was not fried. The door split in two and slid in opposite directions into a wall of ancient gnarled bark. "Come," said Voluspa, inviting her in. They stepped in to a large chamber unlike any Hilda had ever seen or dreamt of. The ochre ceiling was curved at the sides, like an irregular dome. It was also opaque, a bit like the strips of leather Voluspa was wearing. Slithering roots were visible through the ceiling, where a faint flax yellow light lingered. The floor was rough granite rock, carved in sun rays, leading to the center of the room, where stood a well. "What is that?" asked Hilda, whose perspiring face reflected the arctic blue flames dancing about in the octagonal well. "Ylfolk would call it the Howling Cauldron, or the Hevelgirmir, a magical spring where ice met fire and created the 12 rivers. Have you heard about the Nidhogger? The monster our parents scare us about as kids? A dragon that devours those who are guilty of oath-breaking or murder," replied Hilda, watching the mesmerized blue tongues lick the rim of the well. "And adultery? They say that the dragon lives in this very well, ready to cleanse the world of all evil. Would you like me to tell you a secret, Hilda of Ogni and Skeguld?" Hilda nodded. "There is no Nidhogger living at the bottom of this furnace, only cold flames and a means to an end." Hilda only just realized that the well of fire was giving off no heat. She stepped forwards to take a closer look, and Voluspa snatched her wrist. "Caution, young lady. It is usually normal to fear what you do not know, but it is also wise." Voluspa let go of Hilda's arm and added, "You may stroke the flames, but do not look down. Not today." Hilda wiped her wet forehead, although the air was getting colder near the fire. It may have been the side effects of the Scullycomb sweets, or the giddy sensation of discovering something new in these boring Northlands, but Hilda felt an inexplicable connection with the hypnotic blue flames. She raised her eyes above the well's rim and gingerly placed a hand over the edge. "It's freezing," she said, removing her fingers from the flames. "Though so soft and smooth, I can hear them calling me, singing so sweetly, calling me down, down, down." "Hilda!" shouted Voluspa, snapping her out of her reverie. "I see the Howling Cauldron has taken a liking to you, but now is not the time." Hilda glimpsed inside the well the time of a finger snap and felt an invisible snake strangle her. she was assaulted with a physically painful vision of Hedil and Kyoko laughing together in the grove on Vigrid Plains. Then she saw the same scene at another moment she could not remember. The future. Hedil had claws and tore her naked body apart. Voluspa pulled her away. I told you not to stare into Hell's throat. You said nothing about hell, replied Hilda, gasping for air, avoiding eye contact with the flames. Placing trembling hands on her knees, she gathered her wits and said, however, you did say that now was not the time. The time for what? Voluspa remained silent and stared into Hilda's eyes. Then added, if I told you, I'm not sure you could stomach it. Try me. I've seen what you're capable of. Your visions. The art of the mist doesn't frighten me. The undead that live across the realms do not concern me. Your ghoulish creatures of the forest could drain my blood any time I come to see you. But they haven't. Please, tell me what the icy flames are singing, what they want from me. Voluspa gazed at the crawling roots behind the ceiling. She pursed her lips and made up her mind. The cauldron is indeed calling for you, Hilda. There is something special about you, something your kind are oblivious to. You may have guessed that already. The holder can see it, and so can I. You aren't a Huldra, asked Hilda, while enjoying such praise. I am, in a way. Call me a Norn, if you wish. I am the Norn monarch who guards this well, said Voluspa. The Norns have foreseen you accomplishing great things. Such as? Have you ever desired to master the art of the mist, to raise the dead, to command the living? I already do that. No, we do that for you, Voluspa underlined. And by the way, what is the point of bringing back the dead on such a large scale if I'm not there to enjoy the result? It isn't our fault you get yourself killed. Fornicating on the battlefield isn't the brightest of tactics you've envisioned, especially when you keep repeating the same mistake. If I can't remember the error, then how can I correct it? Were you messing with me? Why didn't you leave us all to die? There wouldn't have been anyone left to burn down your festering forest. The 9 Norns respect your feeble attempts at blackmail, Hilda, but you have to understand, our plans align with yours, said Voluspa, turning her back on Hilda to stare into the well. This might interest you. A little green snake told us a strange raven was about to arrive and shatter your world. Yet we thought we should be patient and honor our agreement. And watch us wither and mold, said Hilda glumly. Hilda, I know you aspire to greatness, to reach beyond the ordinary. You're fond of the legend of the Valkyries, are you not? The judges of valor over the sacred battlefield. Who isn't? The Order of the Mist appreciates that aspect of your folklore more than most. Do you know where you are right now? Underground? We're inside one of the 3 gigantic bloody roots of an almighty ash tree. Odin's sacred tree, according to the pious. We are in fact at the border of life and death. Hell and Valhalla. The cauldron is a gateway. It can unlock slumbering powers if you truly possess them, and unleash the hidden ones pumping throughout this ash tree's phloem. Only the bravest can wield the power of Bloody Hoof, the bravest and perhaps the most insidious. Without mischief, where would we acquire any sense of ambition in life and beyond? Without cold-blooded vision and devastating strength, how do we guide the weak? I thought that the Cauldron Dragon seeks to eradicate all evil in the realms. I said the dragon wasn't inside the well, said Voluspa, stroking the skin on her neck that appeared to be scaly for the blink of an eye. Hilda preferred to believe Voluspa was pulling her leg. And if I accept, what's next? Then you must be honest in every way to hell, have nothing to hide, offer your body and soul to the howling cauldron, throw yourself into the fire and embrace your unquestionable superiority. Honesty goes both ways, said Hilda, less concerned about the idea of self-sacrifice. The Scully Comb effects had worn out. Who are Hedil's parents? Why don't you want to tell me? You've been spying on us all, haven't you? We have nothing to hide or prove, Hilda. We do your bidding, and consequently, we have become quite familiar with the people we keep resuscitating. We are offering you more than Helsot's power to rule over the realms of men. Don't tell me this doesn't interest you, or am I just a delusional old hag selling fake golden apples? Hilda instinctively hid her satchel behind her back. It is important that you learn certain realities on your own. They will sculpt your psyche and help it flourish. Experience casts a brighter light than knowledge. And patience has its limits, said Hilda. You'll find out sooner than later. Do not concern yourself with the words of a child. When you are ready, Hilda, when you realize your doomed loved ones are simple distractions, then come to us. Scar your forehead and chest the way I showed you, and run back to me. We will be waiting for you, Hilda. What is happening? Thought Hilda. Her childish dreams of becoming an angel of life and death felt like they were at her fingertips. But the taste was completely opposite to the delicious Scully Comb effect. The excitement was beginning to fester. Why fear something I have always wanted when it's finally within my grasp? Leave 9 hearts at the entrance of the cave. If you want the Order to assist you again, bring back 9 more, but fresh this time. I was delayed. I know. It's time to leave. Voluspa walked away hastily and disappeared behind the cauldron. Hilda gulped at the well. She couldn't make out if Voluspa had actually used the trapdoor or transformed into something else entirely. It happened so quickly and the flames masked her reptilian movement. Hilda wasted no time pondering on the mystery and hurried out of the chamber and up the long spiral stairs and tunnels, trying not to get lost on the way. On her way up, she thought she saw through the crack of a metallic open door a series of rectangles, producing blinding blue light next to huge metal buzzing and purring chests with multiple colored flickering dots. Hilda was more preoccupied with getting out than investigating any further, for now. On the doorstep of Bloody Hoof Caves, Hilda dropped the 9 gluey human hearts, one by one, wiping her hands on the cave walls. A crescendo of growls and pattering clawed feet emerged from the cave. Amongst a pack of feral Hudra, the same boy with obsidian hair rushed out to grab one, but stopped to whisper something to Hilda. My name is Sune, and these stab apples will heal you one day. He slipped a handful of green hearts into her bag and faded into the forest. The others took their time to devour their human hearts, then walked away with defiant glares back down into the tunnels. Goodbye, Sune. Keep your promise, said Hilda softly to herself. Crossing Nabblewood shouldn't be such a challenge now, if that old dragon can be trusted. See you next time for Chapter 5 of the Hilda Chronicles.